Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back to yet another session of our On the Money program, where we get to deal with financial matters that matter. Okay, I took that line from someone else, but anyway, it applies to what we are dealing with today. And we have no other than Kudzai. I'm sure you're all familiar with her now. She needs no introduction. But I am, however, going to ask her to introduce herself today by telling us something she has never told us before, or something that she thinks is probably not in the public domain. Kudzi, how would you introduce yourself today? I mean, we've been on this live chat so often with you, and people already know what you do, what your background is, what your career is. But today, I just want you to tell us something that you think we don't know about you.
Okay, this is very interesting, Patrick, because instead of on the money, it's starting to feel like it's getting personal with Patrick. But that said, one thing that people definitely do not know is my height is 1.53 centimeters. And in spite of me being that short, I used to be in the first team of my basketball team at my high school back in the day, as they say, at St. David's Girls High Point. I was in the first team, and I used to play guard or playmaker. And I almost played for Manicaland, but my parents said, Chikoro Pamberi. So that's something that people probably don't know about me, but you know how we roll here. I can make that thing financial as well. And I want to say that we've just gone past, the first half of the year, and we are now in the second half, literally almost finishing July. I want just to say that it doesn't really matter how far you've gone and perhaps how far you've messed up. Forgive yourself money-wise, and take the second half as an opportunity to recover. Because one thing I'll tell you about the time I used to play basketball, and I was a pretty good player, Patrick. I would even dunk occasionally. Okay. I want to say that sometimes a team would be down. They'll be down in the first quarter. They'll be down in the second quarter, which basically adds up to the first half of the year. But that team could literally rise from the dead, literally, and recover points, put in 3-pointers, keep stamina, gather themselves together, consolidate everything, and go on to win. So let's start by a bit of encouragement from the fact that I could have played for the nation. And I think all I'll say now is, listen, it doesn't matter where people are standing right now. Take lessons from where you've come from, forgive yourself, gather yourself together, and yeah, you can win the second half in spite of the second half. So that's my intro for today, Patrick.
Thanks, because I'm glad I asked you that question because the camera does add height to you. So when we're watching your on the money programs, I mean the episodes that you were shooting at, well, I wouldn't say you really look tall, but now that you mentioned basketball, I mean that's the first. I wonder how high those baskets were if you were dunking, but it's good to know that about. Okay. Yeah. Well, today we're going to be dealing with the secret of the elephant, and I'm sure you do have a lot to say about that. I'm just keen to know now how you're going to be tackling it because when you look at the elephant in the wild, it's known for its amazing memory. And along with that memory comes a lot of knowledge that it has. Now, in order to survive in the wild, every animal needs to know where to get its food, and it also now needs to know how to get back to where it saw the source of that food. Now, when it comes to on the money and how we then relate these characteristics of the animal, how would you then say this principle then relates to on the money, and what's the connection between that?
Okay, lovely. So we do know that the big 5 secrets of money management, which the On the Money program rests on, speaks to each of these animals. Obviously, everything they are and they do has meaning. And like you've already alluded to, with an elephant, it is said that an elephant, and this is actually quite true, that an elephant never forgets. In fact, there are stories that are told from people who live in places like Hwange and Victoria Falls, where you see, elephants quite easily just walking the streets. A story is told of how a certain baby elephant was unfortunately bumped by a bus. And let's assume that the bus was green and yellow in color. And the mommy elephant, doing what typical mummies do, was obviously not happy that her baby was bumped. And she witnessed all of this, and the bus, unfortunately, went off before she could access it. So I'm told that, several buses passed by the next few days, and when that same bus returned, this is a true story, because I was told this by folks in Hwange. When that bus passed around the same area, she literally attacked that exact same bus, with its proper registration number and bus number 52 and whatnot. So elephants do not forget. Another story is told of how a certain man used to take care of elephants in a very bad patch, I think when there was no water and drought, and you'd feed them and a whole lot of other things, showing them kindness. When he died, apparently for some reason, the elephants, recalled where they would meet him. They went there, they literally wept over him. So all I'm just trying to emphasize is that it may sound like folklore, but it's actually quite true that elephants do not forget. However, we humans forget. Now, for example, if I were to ask the average person, tell me every single thing you spent money on in the past month, you probably wouldn't remember. If I were to even ask for you to tell me every single thing you spent money on in the past 6 months, you are unlikely to remember. And so the secret of the elephant is the secret of budgeting, where we are saying we may not remember everything that we've spent money on, but there is a tool we can use that helps us to record our income and in the same light, record our expenditure as part of how we manage money.
Okay, thank you, Kudzi, for that. I'm glad you brought up the issue of budgeting and as it relates to the elephant and its memory. And you also mentioned that we might not remember everything that we spend our income on, but what are the other reasons why people just need to be setting up budgets? I know we speak about it often, and sometimes the word is thrown around loosely to say we need to budget, the budget this, budget that. But what are some of the reasons that, major reasons that people need to be setting up budgets for?
I think the first one for me is always about taking charge, about being in control. Lots of people like to be in charge. That's why people in primary school would want to be class monitors and, tell people to keep quiet and, write down names for punishment and all things. So control and being in charge. I think there's a lot of security that comes when we know that we have a plan in place. And a budget is simply a short-term plan that you are using for perhaps that month, perhaps that quarter, perhaps that year. I want to say that many times some of the things we think are beyond us, we then begin to realize that can actually be achieved. We realize that they can be achieved once we make use of a budget. And so I find that a budget will give you security. It will give you peace of mind. It will give you a sense of control over what you are doing. And basically, it also helps you to be able to forecast the future and have a plan that is in place that helps you to achieve your goals. So there's that security that comes, there's just that ease, the ability to know that I'm actually making some tangible progress in the direction of my dreams. And so for me, these are some of the things that I feel are very, very important when it comes to having a budget. Contrary to popular belief, where people think that a budget is there to kill joy, I actually think a budget is there to help you navigate what you have, what you ought to spend on, and also make room for the things that you like.
I think that's interesting. So planning, control, peace of mind, and security. Those are some of the things I think that you highlighted. But you'll also find that, you also mentioned just now to say that budget is there to kill joy. Now, obviously, if people want to enjoy themselves, then there are going to be certain expenses that they're going to have to incur as far as entertainment is concerned, maybe travel and whatever else. But what are the kinds of different expenses that you have come across, and how best can they be managed?
So under On the Money, we speak of two major groups of expenses. They are what we'd like to call your fixed expenses. And I would say that perhaps open quote, close quote on that, because they will vary depending on people's circumstances. And then there are what we call variable costs. So your fixed costs are costs that you really cannot run away from. If you do not own a property, obviously the first thing people think about when you talk about a budget is having a roof over your head. So it's only children who talk about sweets first. The average adult would probably think about rent. And we know that this is a cost that is recurring. You will need to pay rent in some way. And of course, even if you own a property, there are costs that are attached to owning a property. You will need to pay, you need to pay the city council. You will need to pay what they call rates. And those are what we call fixed costs. They are never going away. They are there every single month. And more often than not, they do not change as much. So you are paying for utilities, you are paying for rent. These are what we call your fixed costs. And then there are some other costs which we call variable costs, Patrick, which may vary by consumption. And so depending, for example, some utilities do vary by consumption, but over time, if a household is more or less the same, they may not change as much. But there are also costs like perhaps your groceries, which then depend on how much people are eating. It's winter now, as we are recording, as we are speaking, and we know that people are probably using more sugar than they would, at least in my household they would, because everyone wants a cup of tea every 3 or so hours. It's atwama periods. And so things like groceries may be variable costs. Things like you're paying for clothing may be variable costs because you pay as you go for different seasons. It's just important to know that there are costs that are fixed and then there are costs that are variable. And when you do your budget, you want to really take account of these things and make sure that you have a solid foundation in terms of knowing what your fixed costs are, and then also making provision for the things that may change. So paying for airtime, for example, is something that would change depending on whether they're calling people or not. It's important just to know that those two classes of costs exist.
Okay, Kudzai. Now, normally when you use the word budget itself, it's prefixed by either annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, probably even daily. But how often should people be preparing these budgets? I mean, for a normal household or for just an individual, how often do you think people need to be preparing budgets?
Awesome. So there are a number of perspectives that one must take. I would say that the more, perhaps the one that recurs most, the one that you would do most, would be what we call your monthly budget, because most people receive money on a monthly basis. And so I would say generally you must match your budget with your cycle for receiving money. And most people, if they go to work, even most people tend to be used to doing it for the month. But I want to just also draw attention to the necessity of making an annual budget in advance. Now, many people are aware that the nation, every November, all things being equal, the Minister of Finance is required to speak to the nation and basically share what the budget is for the coming year. And so a budget is really a plan. I like to say that a budget is you basically spending your money on paper first before you do it in real life. It really helps to have a feel of what are we likely to spend, what are we likely to receive in the coming year, even for a family, even for individuals. When I started doing that, and that's more than 10 years ago, Patrick, it completely changed my life. And of course, one may say, how am I supposed to know? How do I forecast? I want to say that once you begin the journey of developing a budget every month, I would say after 3 months, 3 to 6 months, you kind of have an idea of, for your level of living, how much you spend, your fixed expenses, plus your variable costs. So if I were to put that in dollar terms, for example, because it's a lot easier, because I know with other currencies, rates may change, but I want to say that if perhaps I do a dollar budget, I may then say for my household, I need a total of $500 per month. And this is all inclusive of everything that comes, that needs to be paid for, your school fees, your rent, your fuel, if it's women, we want to be made up, and a whole lot of other things. So you have a feeling of what the cycles are. And so that should then help you to inform you that, listen, if per month we're spending 500, then our annual budget in this household is $6,000. And if you do that, that then helps you to be able to come up with, an annual budget. And it helps you to then say to yourselves, how best do we develop income or generate income that matches the level of living that we want to sustain? And so I think daily might be overkill, but suffice to say that there are people who make money on the daily and vachita by taona. But over time, I think it's much, much easier if you're able to at least be having a monthly budget, have a feel of what your monthly budget is. And at the end of every year, plan in advance for the next year with an annual budget.
Okay, now, Kudzai, regardless of whether it's a monthly one, weekly budget, annual budget, whatever the case may be, what are the steps that one needs to take in order to prepare these? I'm assuming that one needs to probably sit down with the family, sit down with themselves, just collect their thoughts, prepare themselves psychologically. What are the steps that people just need to be cognizant of as they prepare budgets?
Okay, so we do have a very simple but very profound 5-step budgeting process that works fabulously when it comes to On the Money. You do know that we always give you guys some really great practical pointers. I want to just perhaps throw back first by saying that we did say that a budget will help us to know how we are actually spending our money, right? It helps us to decide priorities, we can plan, and we can be in charge. So our 5 steps are very nice and interesting. Step number 1 is not reverse a jive. And this one is for the old people who are listening. There used to be a very popular song. Do you know it, Patrick? That used to go, step number 1. Reverse a jive. Okay, you're old. Now I know you're old. So step number 1 is you must learn what you earn. And I like that it is poetic. We're basically saying, and I did allude to this in the beginning, over time, you have an idea of your income, perhaps per month or per week, or for some, per annum, because I know some people have, annual cycles. Your farmers are a really great example of that. So it's important to actually know what is coming in each month. And then, are there any deductions that are taken from a salary or whatever amounts that I am making every month? You need to be aware that every month I generally will make about, say, $500. And why is this important, Patrick? Because that is the ceiling of what you can spend. In reality, it is possible to spend more than you earn. But we are people who are managing money according to the big 5 secrets of money management. We want to make sure that we are in charge. We want to not spend money that we do not have. We want to make sure that we stay within the limits of our income. So unlike perhaps an annual budget for a nation where they forecast what they're going to spend and hope to make that money, when it comes to individuals, when it comes to families, let us work with that income as our upper limit. So learn what you earn. That is step number 1. Step number 2 of 5 is to then know what you owe. And by this, we're basically just saying, record your expenses. We want to invite you to go ahead and do the second thing, which is to list and to write down all your expenses. So think about everything you spend money on. Think about, what you owe. Some people may be already in spaces where they owe people. They are owing particular companies. They are owing a bank. They are owing friends and family. And then, of course, the national most borrowed thing is chicken. You are owing mining. So all of these expenses, you want to be able to list down so that you are aware. Now, this is an exercise that will be very, very interesting. And this is why we said at the beginning, an elephant may not, unlike us, forget, but because we as individuals forget, we do need to list down all of the things that we paid for. And this is an exercise, like I said, that may take you a couple of months before you kind of know everything. I would say over 3 to 6 months, you would know all of the expenses. One of the simplest ways to actually do this, to record once you start, is for everything you spend, keep a receipt. Perhaps also, use the digital way. Perhaps you get SMSs in your phone from your bank, and then you can be able to say, okay, I spent on this in that shop. So over time, you will develop a nice long list. It will be long of the things that you spend on. There are things we often forget, like airtime, that look like small things, but every single dollar will add up. So you list all of the things that are expenses. You basically know what you owe. So you learn what you earn, number 1. Number 2, you then know what you owe. And then step number 3 is then you work out your income less your expenses. You are now comparing or netting off the two, the income side and the expensing side. And this should be able to tell you, because numbers don't lie, Patrick. This will tell you whether you're living beyond your means. If you found that you've got an excess of income over expenditure, you're in a good place. But if you find that you've got an excess of expenses, your expenses are much more than your income, then you do need to rethink your budget, rethink your lifestyle. And so, numbers will then tell you if your income is 500, your expenses are adding up to 600, you know that you've got to make a plan to make sure that that 100 is somehow catered for. All right. But if you're in a place where you have 500 and your expenses are 400, then I would say congratulations, you're in a really great place because you have more income than you have expenditure. And this is a very important place to also begin to reflect on saving. Because many times when you talk about expenses or the things we should spend on, people will think about what we are doing in terms of just paying. And we want to then tie this in with the secret of the lion, where we're saying pay yourself first. So as part of what I would call expenses, you want to make sure that in your budget, you've made provision for saving and saving in order to invest. And so step number 4 after this is, after you've reflected, you want to then draw up your budget once again. You are then saying to yourself, what is our disposable income? What are the fixed costs? What are the variable costs or variable expenses? What are the irregular expenses? And over time, you will know the things that do not change, the things that vary by use, which are probably your utilities, and some irregular expenses that don't necessarily come every single month. And then you want to then say, I must make adjustments now. So this is the place where you revisit everything line by line, brutally, Patrick, brutally. Some things you may need to reduce. This could work very well with things like food, but maybe not your water consumption. And then some other things you might have to take out completely, because perhaps at that time for that month, there isn't enough to cover. And this I'm just speaking to with regards perhaps to a certain amount of income. You'd have taken account of your job, you'd have taken account of your side hustles, you'd have taken account of any donations. If you're receiving money from the diaspora, if you're so lucky, you might not get that every single month. And so it's important to have a core budget according to your own income that you generate. And the last step, which is step number 5, and I always say that this is actually the hardest step, is to review your budget. The average Zimbabwean will do very well if you ask them to draw up a budget, perfectly actually. But not everybody would be able to actually adhere or stick to or live according to that budget line by line. And so this is really where the great work is, sticking to the budget, checking that your budget is realistic, and then making changes, because you will recognize as you go through life that on some months you might not spend as much as you thought you would. And some months you may spend a little more than you thought you would. But over time, you will land at a certain household or individual figure. And so this is an exercise. I like how you exercise. You did say this at the very beginning, Patrick, that on some score, it's important just to come together. If you're a family, you probably would make much more progress if you do this together, rather than having one person draw up a budget and then just throw it, to other people, because there will be cheating involved. And I'm talking about you saying to people, yeah, we're not eating eggs. They'll eat eggs while you're at work. So you've really got to co-create this thing. Perhaps as the last thing I want to just say, it's important to think about the fact that, fixed expenses will be much easier to probably budget for, because they will stay more or less the same every month. Variable expenses may, obviously vary. For example, like we're saying that we're in winter, we might use more electricity. So don't beat yourself. It does happen because of, the season that we're in. And then, of course, those irregular expenses, your fees, your uniforms, we don't buy those every single month, but they will be coming in. I just thought to highlight some of the practicalities around those expenses. And so, yes, it's important to then, review, and over time, you will find your magic number. I must also finally add that if you are realizing that your budget is not adding up, look, there is a limit, Patrick, that you can keep cutting and reducing and removing, because it's short of nothing. You'll be left with nothing, literally. I want to say that it's important to always remember that a budget has 2 facets. Many times we seem to overemphasize the expenses and the cutting and forget that there's also the income side. It's also important to think about, how do I generate more income? Because especially if you have fixed expenses, there's not much you can do. Now, if your income is less than your fixed expenses, you're in big trouble. And so let's also think, when you do the budget, around how do I increase my income? I know I've said paragraphs, but I hope these 5 steps make sense. Let me reiterate. We're basically saying that, learn what you earn. And then number 2, list all of your expenses. And then number 3, you want to then go back and make necessary adjustments. And then you want to review your budget, and you want to then live according to your means as you go. It's a journey, to be honest. It's not done in a day. It's not done in a month.
Yeah, Kudzai, I mean, you did give us a mouthful, but everything that you did say was very insightful. Now, as you're speaking, I was also just thinking that you also mentioned that, it's easy to come up with a budget, or it could be easy for some people to actually come up with a budget, but then sticking to it then becomes a challenge, and then you find yourself going from one budget to another without keeping track of what was actually taking place with the first budget that you had set up. So my question now would be, are there any tools or systems that people can use to actually track their budgets? Because often you may hear people talking about, I've gone over budget with a certain purchase or something along those lines. So how do people track their budgets in real life?
Okay, great. I think that's a really important and practical question. I'm really tempted to say you are a practical Patrick.
That's a line.
Get personal with Patrick and practical Patrick. So 3 things come to mind. Now, one of the things which is the secret of the elephant is really how elephants are very structured in how they do their things. And there's what we call the envelope system. Now, this sounds like it's very base and mundane and old school, but it works. Some people know that their parents growing up would put money into envelopes, right? And so what you simply do is that once you have the money, you literally set aside some portions. Into different envelopes. So in order to make sure that you do not overspend, and this works very well for people who say, I'm over budget, take rent money, put it in its envelope, right? That one is easy because you just take it as it is, you deliver the entire amount, envelope included, to the landlord. And then when you are budgeting, remember we said you've got to make sure you take account of, food, clothing, groceries, airtime. Let's assume that you've put in money into an envelope for airtime. When that envelope is, or when the money in that envelope is finished, that means you cannot buy more airtime. Because you've exhausted, and it's funny that even when you listen to them speaking to, the budget, like the annual budget for a country, they actually make reference to a provision for each area. They call it a vote, or they may call it an envelope. So these are very nice technical terms which we can start to use for ourselves by simply saying, hey, guys, I've exhausted my envelope, for hair or for makeup or, for drinking. And it's basically just saying you are putting into compartments what you spend. So if you're able to find cash, you can actually put money into actual physical envelopes. I'll tell you this, I actually do that myself. Like if I'm, perhaps, budgeting money that's in dollars, or if I have actual cash, I do put money in specific envelopes. So if the movie envelope is finished, it's brilliant when you have kids. You assure them, guys, we had $50 in this envelope. The envelope is finished because you guys had popcorn and jelly babies and all those other things, at the movies, and stuff like that, right? So it's very easy to illustrate. That's one. Another way is to go very simple. Buy a simple exercise book. Those scholastic exercise books that have, mathematics. And I love women that, how they use those, regularly and almost religiously, draw a line in the middle even, and they just say these are income and expenses, and they're continually tracking. So the budget is there, but then you're continually tracking what you've removed from each line, right? Until you are able to see what's left in which line, which, a specific place you overspent in the past month, which specific place you made savings in the past month, and then you adjust. Because sometimes it's not that you've overspent really. Maybe the mistake you made is you didn't provide enough airtime, or you didn't provide enough for transport, or something like that. And so I like to think that every subsequent budget becomes better than the other by reason of experience. It's as simple as that, right? But the other thing that you can use, because I know a lot of people are very tech savvy, is to make use of a device, right? So, obviously the video will not tell, but this is an iPhone, guys. It's an iPhone. It's my iPhone 8. And yeah, you can make use of simple budgeting apps where you can actually download those and put it in there, and you can make use of that. Or if you have a computer, you basically just use a laptop and you open up a nice Excel spreadsheet and you make use of a budget. I think we did say in one of these shows, Patrick, that one of the things I do is that I do a podcast. I think I can just put this out there because I do have a free tool that people can use. If you go to my podcast website, which is www.mari.co.zw, there I have prepared a very simple budget template, and it's free. So thank Old Mutual that they've brought me here so that we can have this conversation. You can download that and make use of it. We're basically just saying that there are tools, lots of them. Even if you go on the internet and just Google a budget template, you will find lots of workable, simple templates that you can use. And using these templates, you can then keep track of what comes in and what goes out. So these are the practicalities. For me, I use a combination. There are things I write down because I like to write. For the major things, I like to write them down and then cross out, the things I would have achieved in a year. And then for my day-to-day, or what I would call my monthly, I put that in an Excel sheet. And then when I actually have actual cash, I put that in envelopes. So it can be a combination, it can be a hybrid. What is important is that you track. And lest I forget, please, I know we've only spoken about mundane things, your rents, your school fees and stuff. Under our expenses, under my expenses, I always have an envelope for nice things, an envelope for the things I enjoy doing.
Thank you so much, Kudzai. But also for our viewers, just to let you know that an Android phone works just as well, and so does a feature phone, because at the very least, a feature phone has a calculator. Let's just learn how to use those ones.
Yes, I think
Now, Kudzai, I like all the points that you brought up, but I know this question comes up quite often, and it has to do with inflation, because you spoke about putting money in envelopes. It's easier when you're doing that in US dollars, but if you're going to be doing it in our RTGS currency, right, and you're going to be putting money in an envelope, let's say whatever business that you're working on gets you your income in the Zim dollar, right? And you have to put that money in an envelope. Now, obviously, people are going to worry about inflation. How do you then cater for that? Do you then use what they call, the inflation adjusted figures for that budget? How do you then, do you add more money to the envelope just in case prices go up? What should people be doing if you're going to be budgeting Zim dollars?
That's a brilliant question as well, Patrick, and very, very pertinent, because I am aware that the majority of people in Zimbabwe, at least for the people that are listening from Zimbabwe, will be earning and generating income in, the local currency. And so inflation is something we definitely must take account of. And I want to say that when you draw up a budget, it's always important, like you said, to inflation adjust, make provision. So worldwide, they generally say, after you've generated a budget, and perhaps your budget comes up to $100 in US, or even in RTGS, make a provision of about 25 to 30%, right? You're going to, and so it's always safe to have what we call a buffer, sort of not quite an emergency fund, as it were, but just to have a buffer amount that you put in. So whatever budget you draw up, put in another 25% on top, or 30% at most, and that will help you most times to be able to buffer. But again, I would say in an environment like ours, I'm not really imagining a situation where you keep money in an envelope for 30 days. Ideally, when you've done a budget at the end of the month, like we are at month end now, you're basically paying for things that would take you into the next month. So pay for those things. And that's how you hold inflation, right? So if it's money for food, you've made the budget. And remember, we said this is spending on paper. Then go ahead and spend in reality. Buy the groceries that you're able to buy. If they're not perishable, buy as much as you can. And then where you can buy the perishable goods, if you can freeze, if you can store, and then only keep a very minute amount or a small amount of cash for those things that you would have to pay for on the daily. So, things you might need to buy weekly, like your vegetables. And for people like me, I don't like meat. If it's been frozen, I can taste the difference. I might buy meat, on a weekly basis. But for some, as a way of, managing inflation, they may buy meat for the entire month. If you have a freezer and you live in a place where power is not an issue, then you have that ability as well. So there is a theory of a budget, which we were speaking of, but in practice now, in a place where there is inflation, as soon as you get the money, as long as you've made the plan, you now go and immediately spend according to the plan. Only keep in the envelopes money that would be needed on a week-by-week basis, things like bus fare, for example, and where possible, actually take advantage of, the fact that you can change money from one currency to the other. So, if you've made provision in Zimbabwe dollars for your bus fare for the rest of the month, then quickly change it to a currency that you'll be able to practically use. And then when you go through the month, you know that inflation, you've gone ahead of it, and you've literally vaccinated yourself against the effects of inflation that is to come. So lots of practical pointers around that. Do the theory, yes, but straight after, go ahead and begin to spend according to the plan.
Thank you so much for that. Now, in summary, what I'm kind of getting also from what you're saying is that for your weekly, your monthly budget, yes, it can be done in Zim dollars because you need to be spending the money as you have budgeted it. But also, if you're going to be making a longer budget, like a longer time budget, like for your quarterly budget or your annual budget, then you might as well just convert that into a currency that can take you through that period that you're going to be budgeting for, which I think is good advice that our viewers might just need to take into account. But now I just brought up the issue to do with inflation, which is also a common excuse that people use for not budgeting. But what are the other excuses that you have probably come across in your line of work, and what are your responses to them? I mean, what reasons do people put up for not or avoiding a budget completely?
One of my favorites, which is a complete lie, is I have so little money. Why should I even be bothering to budget? You know, I want to say that Iwe Usinamari, the person that has very limited funds, is literally the person who should be number one when it comes to planning, because so I like budgets for one thing. They will tell us whether we are living according to our means or not. One thing about numbers are not going to coddle you. Numbers are just going to tell you straight up, that, dude, this is all you have. And so you've got to make a plan according to that income. And so in a way, I think as a start, your budget is a place that forces you to really think about your lifestyle. Now, the problem which many people will then have, Patrick, and this is the common excuse, is I have very little money. I think you can make a life out of any level of living, any level of income. What is important is for you as an individual to always make sure that you then live according to the means. So the means is the income. This is what I have on the table. And then I go ahead and budget. So I want to say that having very little money, according to you, is not an excuse. I assure you there are lots of people who probably have the same amount, if not less, who are living reasonably decent lifestyles simply because they've put in a plan in place. Because it's really about planning. We're basically saying, okay, I only have $100. I may aspire to $150 life, but I know right now, let me have the reality check because this is what is in my hand. Now, I'm not saying that we must kill our dreams, still dream bigger, but let that amount, that small amount, and I like someone who once said that, most seeds are much, much smaller than the thing that they grow. If you see the seed of a tree, it is much, much, much smaller than the tree that grows from it. Now, if it's small amounts of money, treat that as a seed and say to yourself, how best do I navigate my life so that I live on of the 100, maybe 80, and take the 20 in such a way that it will make me more income so that next time, Pambera, I can be that person who's also able to have more money. But I'll tell you something about people who are wealthy and people who manage money well, because this is on the money, right? We speak about the secrets of money management. I notice that people who are wealthy are very careful with money. They're not reckless with it. And that's why sometimes, particularly people complaining that, Kudzai is wealthy, but but it's it's not that they're stingy. No. Probably they had an envelope for entertaining people from all walks of life and it's been exhausted. So I'm chatting. So the rest of you will have to fund that the Mutengi because the Mutengi has a budget. And Mutengi always has a budget. People that are good with money always have a plan, in place for what they can spend. And so I want to say that that is the biggest one, biggest excuse. I have so little money, so why should I even bother? Have a plan in place. I say this because number two, you will notice that if you were to keep track of how you spent your money, which is what a budget will help you to do, for just a year, just a year, you'll be surprised at what you could have potentially done with the income you generated. Because one thing I like about budgets is that they will report, the Shona is, mangara, It will literally just tell you how you did misdeeds and you'll begin to see, okay, I spent this much on cake or on alcohol. And yet I want a car and I'm not driving and I spent $1,500. That could have been a Datsun 120Y, or half a Vitz or something like that, So I like the realities that come from using a budget. So the biggest excuse is always, I have so little money. Second one is always, things are consistently changing. I can never keep up. We've already debunked that and said, listen, you plan in the instant, and then there are measures you take, you spend, you buy things in advance, you change money to a more stable currency. Another excuse that I hear around budgeting is, I've budgeted before, these things, don't work. It's because you've given up after 1 month, because you see a reality of how bad you are with money. And then you're like, I'm just bad with money. No, don't resign yourself. Anyone can learn. It's never too late in life to do the right thing. So I'll say those are the three most common ones. I have too little money, or things are consistently changing, or people just give up easily. I want to challenge us. In fact, the Zimbabwe speak is always, I want to challenge Zimbabweans from all walks of life to start from this month end. Just do it for 6 months and let's have this conversation after 6 months. Let's see how far you'd have progressed.
Okay, now finally, because you've given us the reasons that are commonly put up, when it comes to avoiding the budgeting thing altogether. But then also, I think in the last point that you mentioned, you spoke about how people easily give up. Say you've done away with the reasons, and you know that giving up is also one of the bad habits you need to rid yourself of. How do you then get the habit to stick? How does one get the habit of making a budget or come up with a budget stick?
Fabulous. So I'll say the first thing is accountability. And this is why it's important if you have a family that you actually share. Now, you will find that we can be much, much more efficient in our families if, and I know this is going to be contentious, but I think it must just be put out there. If you have a husband, if you have a wife, if you have a spouse, or if you have more than one, we always say spices, have that conversation, co-create. If you co-create a budget, the likelihood of you deviating from it all by yourself is very low because you have an accountability partner. And this is your partner. It could even be children. There's absolutely no harm. One of the things, and I saw a conversation that was happening somewhere where someone used to say that, my mom would just show us her pay slip and she'd be like, guys, so someone was talking about how they were raised by a single mom. She'd just say, this is what I earn, guys. This is it. And then on top of the things, when I buy and sell things, I didn't make an extra, maybe $50, but this is it. So mumba muno, mune 550. So how best do we live the lives that we want with this level of income? And that accountability will force everyone to, in a way, not in a negative way, police each other, if I may call it that. You then make sure that you make use of whatever is there. If it's utilities, in a responsible way, you are eating responsibly. Not to say that you do not have nice things, but you're just aware that this is the limit we have right now. So all of us are trying our best to make sure we manage our expenses. But at the same time, we're also then saying we want other nice things. Let's also think about how we generate more income. So having this conversation openly, and I'm going to say something that I know is contentious. Husbands, tell women how much you make. It will save you a lot of trouble. I'm telling you, one of the greatest life hacks that I know some men have done is literally to hand over the money to the woman and say, make sure it lasts the month. Guys, but this is an aside. I'm just building what Arthur said last week. I was just listening to him and enjoying, the last session and enjoying some of the gems he was throwing out there. So I'm just saying that in relationships, it does help to have accountability. If you're a single person, you can also make use of, friends or family that are trusted as an accountability partner, and then you share your goals. But another thing, and this is really relating because all of the big 5 animals relate, just throwing out there, when we spoke about the secret of the leopard, I believe, and we spoke about planning, we did say if you've got powerful visions, they are compelling. And so, if you see that using a budget will help you to create space to do things you want, like, for example, or to obtain certain things you want to buy. You have only got an Android, you want to buy an iPhone, right? By using a budget and having that dream, that is something that can actually steer you towards that dream. So each time you are tempted to spend in a funny way, you begin to recall that I want to buy an iPhone or I want to buy the latest techno, because I'm also a big fan of Androids as well, Patrick. There's some really great ones. Or I want to go on holiday to Kariba or something like that. Or I want to buy new shoes. That powerful, compelling vision in the short term or in the long term, is something that will help you to stay on track with the budget. Because here's the thing. Dollars add up, cents add up to dollars, and every single dollar will add up to many more dollars. And so there's every motivation, because at the end of the day, imali yako, it's your money. And so if you're smart with that money, you can then be able to leverage it to do more than you had imagined, simply because you have the discipline of using a budget. So accountability is everything. Having powerful visions that you're saying, look, I am being careful with money because I want to achieve this specific thing that will be compelling. And I want to say number 3, and perhaps the last thing, when you have been great with money and you've used a budget, the thing that you've promised yourself, buy it. Okay. Sometimes don't always be too reasonable. And let me just quantify this. We can't be putting all the money just to go tenga reasonable things. I always say, budget, sometimes also, buy the thing you wanted, buy the pizza because you've done well, reward yourself. So built into your system a form of reward, so that if you do very well at the end of the month and you say, if I make some saving because I've stuck to my budget. I am going to allow myself to use perhaps a quarter or half of that saving, not for reasonable things like putting it in unit trusts and stuff, but just to buy myself a very small thing like a chocolate I enjoy, a very quality chocolate. So not your usual Pascal, okay? And no diss to Pascal. I'm just saying that there's more expensive chocolate, right? Or I will buy myself a pair of shoes because I've done more in my budget. Because I feel like in life, we can't keep deferring enjoying certain things. On the money is simply saying manage your money so that you take care of the basics, but you're also able to enjoy life as you go. That, for me, is everything.
Thank you so much, Kudzai. We are approaching the end of our program, but what I'm just going to do what I'm going to do now a bit differently. Normally, I would ask you to just give parting shots, but I'm going to throw you under the bus today because you're a seasoned financial presenter and speaker. So I know we are not live, but had we been live, our viewers were probably going to be asking certain questions, about the whole talk and the chat that we have had now. What do you think are some of the questions that people might have out there, in your parting shots that people might have regarding the secret of the elephant and budgeting? And how would you just address one or two of the questions that you think our viewers might be asking?
I think the biggest question people will be asking is the how? How? Because I think in theory, to be honest, we're not saying new things. The fight is mostly in the inside. So how do I fight my own demons internally? Or I've done budgets before and then did it because of the external things and stuff. But I always want to say that, look, the basics of managing money will not go away. It doesn't matter which country you're in. It doesn't matter what's happening with the economy. And I know we hate being compared, but at this point, I think it's important to say, look around you and look at other people who are living honest lives, yeah, who probably generate the same level of income or similar to you. I want to say that don't be offended when they seem to be doing okay. It's not always, and it's a bad mindset to always say, to think that everybody who's doing well or making money is a thief or akaromba and whatnot. The secret is in planning. It truly is. I'll tell you one thing. With the secret of the elephant, which is budgeting, over time, you will find that you will do well with money. Everyone I know personally who's done very well, you don't wake up in 1 year wealthy or doing extremely well. It's taking small baby steps and being consistent. So my challenge to you when people ask how, is just start keeping a budget and stick to it. Stick with it, like I said, 6 months, stick with it a year, you will begin to see the results. Because once you know what you earn and once you know what you owe, and you are consistent in balancing that out, over time, you actually be surprised how you can do so much by simply living on less than you make. Not because you do not make the money, not because you do not deserve it. But I want to say, perhaps as a parting shot, I read this somewhere. Someone was just basically saying, what would happen if you lived your life for now in an extraordinary way, so that in the future, you can also live in an extraordinary way? I hope you heard me. It might take you 2 or 3 years of looking like you are pinching pennies too much. But the amount of liberty you would, or what you would unlock by then putting some of that extra money into investments, putting that extra money into places that generate more income, after 2 or 3 years, by living extraordinary now, you are guaranteed that in the future, you will also live extraordinary then. So you thought you were throwing me under the bus, but I snuck in my closing and parting shot. And so at this point, I dropped the mic.
Thank you so much, Kudzai, for that. There's another gentleman also some time back that made a comment like that. And you thought you throwing me under the bus, but you should know that I was born under the bus. But well, that's not what you're saying. You just did a mic drop. Thank you for that. It does bring to an end our program for today. And I'd like to thank those of you that are going to join in and watch us. And I encourage you also to just keep track of all these presentations that we're going to be making and the chats that we're going to be having along financial lines, just to help you better improve your budgeting process and keeping track of your budgets, together with other financial principles that we're going to be sharing with you. Otherwise, from me and Kudzai today, we just hope that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Good afternoon.
Cheers.